Hey, this is Steve. I know you're sitting here listening to Moveable Dough and you're thinking to yourself, how could I make a podcast, Steve? Well, let me tell you. Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and even earn money, all in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters. Okay, here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or your computer, so no matter what your setup is like, you could start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. And best of all, it's totally free with no catch. Ever since I discovered Spotify for Podcasters, I've really enjoyed the flexibility that it allows me in creating my podcast. I highly recommend you give it a try. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started. Welcome to Moveable Dough. This is Steve Danielson. Each week on Moveable Dough, I sit down with a composer to talk about their lives, their musical journeys, and, of course, their music. Come with me as we explore each unique path into composition and what they have to share with the world. For a complete archive of episodes, as well as access to the shorter segments called Movable Snippets, visit my website, sdcompose.com/movabledough. Hey, this is Steve. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Moveable Dough. My guest today is Andrew Morgan Smith. Andrew is a film and media composer that has scored over 55 film and television projects. He studied composition and music media at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. Andrew has been a guest lecturer at many high schools and universities across the country, including New York University, Emory University, Louisiana State University, and others. In the past 10 years, he has scored over 90 projects across all media. I'm very excited to get to know more about you and your music. So Andrew Morgan Smith, welcome to Moveable Dough.
Thank you so much for having me, Steve. I really appreciate it.
So I see several mentions of Louisiana in your bio. Is that where you grew up?
Yeah, that's where I'm from. I grew up in a small place called Lafayette, Louisiana. It's where I went to high school, where I went to college. It's actually kind of where I got my start, and not by kind, I mean that is literally where I got my start. But yeah, that's what all the Louisiana references are.
So how did you start? Were you on piano or voice, or what were you doing first?
Yeah, so we started. My father was a tuba performance major in college, and so he thought that it was very important that we all kind of had found musical foundations if we decided to do any kind of music. So around first grade, so I have two sisters who are about 7 years older than me, and around first grade we all kind of started piano, and we took piano lessons. But we kind of were a musical family. Like, we listened to soundtracks, and we did all these different things, and I think that was something I kind of didn't. I took for granted a bit as a kid, like being exposed to all these different kinds of music, being exposed to, I learned guitar from watching my dad play guitar. I joined band in fifth grade and did high school, did all this different stuff. So that was kind of how I got my start musically, but I do just remember, I have pretty early memories of there's this thing that sticks in my mind. There's this cassette tape that my dad used to have. It was a Pops in Space tape by the Boston. It was John Williams conducting the Boston Pops with a bunch of different music. Some of it was his, some of it was other people's. And I remember listening to that tape, and even if I hadn't, seen the movie, I remember like imagining what was going on, So it's kind of been this omnipresent thing in my life.
Well, that's awesome, because I saw in your bio that you're like a multi-instrumentalist. Some of the instruments I saw listed were piano, guitar, saxophone, clarinet, flute, trombone, and euphonium, which I used to play as well, which is why that caught my attention.
Yeah.
So would you say that there is an instrument that sort of was your main instrument?
Yeah, I mean, I was a saxophone major in college,
okay.
So that's the instrument that I feel um, we'll just say most at home with, whenever you practice on it hours and hours and hours and hours. you know, it is like the other things have varying levels of capability. And I definitely know where my limits are, you know.
Sure.
Um, but saxophone is one of those things where I feel confident in most things where I can perform what I need to perform on it, you know.
Right. So when did you start actually writing music?
Actually, during piano lessons when I was a kid, I didn't like practicing, which I can definitely empathize with my children now who don't want to practice. So I started to just kind of do whatever, like just kind of make stuff up, and I'd say, "Oh, I'm composing." I didn't want to deal with it. Well, that was a great idea until my dad thought that was great, and then he hooked me up to, really early notation software that would actually notate what you were playing in, like Sibelius, first early
Right.
versions of Sibelius where you do like MIDI timing and I and I remember I played in this thing. I brought it to my piano teacher and she thought, "Oh, this is great." So I ended up having to perform this like random thing that I made at a concert, like at a recital for her. And I just remember, like, I remember I couldn't because I did these like clusters because I didn't know what you don't know what you're doing, and so I remember like not remembering which notes were the right notes for the clusters, and it didn't go the way that I would have hoped.
Yeah. Do you remember what you called that first composition?
No, not at all. It just burned the recital is burned into my brain of me, at the front of a room with like a electric keyboard and like trying to perform this thing, you know. But obviously it didn't dissuade me that much, but that was quite an experience.
That's awesome. So when did film and television and media music sort of enter the picture? Was that something you always envisioned yourself dealing with?
No, I mean, despite it being kind of always around and me listening to it and making up stuff to it, I never saw it as a um career path. In fact, I actually just wanted to be a normal composer before I wanted to be a film composer.
Hmm.
I remember writing a couple, classical pieces, like I mean like concert works, right? Not classical pieces, but concert works as like a high school student, just kind of messing around writing a couple random things. Um and even I remember my band director in high school saying, "Oh, you should write what you know, write concert band music," because I was a saxophonist, so saxophone's not allowed in orchestra usually, unless it's special circumstances. So
Well, there's too much sax and violins for
it's
that.
true. It's true. And obviously one saxophone is too many in orchestra. So that was kind of where I initially had started. And then in high school, I saw the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie, and for whatever reason, that really clicked for me at that time. Like I must have seen it 7 times in theaters, and it just clicked. It's like this is what I want to do, you
Uh-huh.
know.
So like the
Uh,
soundtrack to Pirates?
yeah, for it just the right and it's I know a lot of people. I mean, I love Star Wars. I love all these different scores, but it really was um a turning point in my brain, we'll say. Um, and from there, I kind of all my efforts like shifted to that.
Uh-huh.
And I still write concert music. I've been commissioned to write concert music, and I play in concert groups and all this kind of stuff, and I enjoy doing that. But it just really wasn't where I ended up seeing my and it, I'm not really sure. Also, I mean, I don't know. Why does anything strike us at such a formative age? Because I do enjoy playing in wind ensembles. I do enjoy playing in all these different places. Maybe it was also the idea of, um, media to music is such a powerful format that maybe that was like part of what it is. Part of what pushed me towards that. But that was the moment that changed everything.
That's awesome. So thinking back on your formative years, is there a music teacher that you think had a lasting impact or influence on the direction you went?
I think my composition teacher in college, who's Dr. Quincy Hilliard, who's mostly known for his concert band works. He's like a he does a lot of clinics. He does a lot of this stuff. He was always very supportive of everything that I was interested in. I went and I met with him before I went to college at UL, and he was very supportive then. He was very supportive of the whole thing, and frankly, all the teachers at the School of Music really were, which was one of the benefits of going to a smaller school.
Hmm.
I went to the school because it had a music media program. At the time, it was like the only one in the state at a state school, which music media is like a music production degree, kind of a jack of all trades, right? It has
Sure.
audio engineering, arranging, recording. There's a film scoring portion. There was all these different things instead of going directly into just composition. Because I figured I could always do comp lessons on the side. Dr. Hilliard always let me do kind of whatever I needed to do. And that was kind of what the school allowed me to do as well. They knew that I was working on stuff. They knew I was trying to do this. So they kind of let me do whatever I wanted. Like kind of be more selective about how I wanted to pursue my education. But I
Sure.
think the supportive side of Hilliard, where he never really constrained me about what I was writing. As long as I was writing, he was happy to give feedback on it, give me ideas, talk about it. But because I've heard some schools do things where it's very paint by numbers, right? Like you don't write a large ensemble work until you're a senior in college. Like you only write chamber works whenever you're in earlier years in college. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't that at all, which I think for me was a really good format.
Yeah.
I understand for some people, I understand why you'd be a little bit more constrained, especially for people who aren't as motivated. I felt like I kind of was an insane person, like, and maybe you kind of have to be a little bit crazy to push yourself in this job because it is kind of like an all-consuming thing.
Yeah. So your online bio mentions that you're currently working on season 3 of Disney's animated show, The Owl House. So I know you've done work for big studios in the past. How is it working for the mouse?
I
Do
mean,
they
it's
have any
great.
different expectations or anything?
I mean, it's been great. So I'm working like co-scoring and working under Brad Breek, who has done a ton of stuff. He did like Gravity Falls. He's done a ton of work. In fact, I first worked for him on a movie called We Bear Bears, which was the movie of the show, like like a animated show will wrap up and they'll do a movie.
Right.
So I ended up working on that with him, and he called me out of the blue and said, "Hey, I have this show. I think it's just a lot of work." And I didn't know exactly what he was. I didn't get at the time exactly what he was talking about, but he was like, it's like an older show, like it's definitely like an older targeted show. So the music it's not like it's not, we'll just say like kiddie music. And he's like, it's just very time consuming to write, and I need help. So I said, sure, that sounds great. And frankly, I know a lot of people have had mixed experiences working for Disney, but my experience has been great. I don't know whether it's just been the team working on it, the music executives have been great. Mark has been great. And Dana, the showrunner, has been great. Her notes were all, completely reasonable. There was no there was no insanity that you can sometimes get from executive notes.
Sure.
Um, and so it was like pretty smooth down to whenever we just turned in the last I say just like we turned in the last episode in January for the finale, which I think airs in April.
Okay.
And and we also, so as a side note, it's a shortened season, and it's only 3 specials, so it's 3 45-minute to an hour long episodes, so they're basically double length episodes. And we worked in a half episode basis, so we do like the first half of the first episode, the second half of the first episode, and then put those together. So like on the third episode, she sent us back notes, and it was like 4 tweaks, like, so she was like, we had kind of really honed in on the sound
Awesome.
that we needed. But I mean, frankly, it was great. I wouldn't hesitate to work with them again on stuff. It was a great experience.
All right, well, go check out Owl House if you haven't yet. So when you do sit down to work on a new project, whether it be Owl House or a new film or whatever, do you have a routine that you follow to help you quickly form melodic ideas?
Um, well, thankfully on the Owl House, there's it's a third season of a show, so whenever you have that, there's such a well-worn um initial basis for what the sound is and
Right.
what the themes are. And I got to do other stuff because the characters go in new directions and it gets pretty dark. So I was able to go like full on horror with some with some of the music. But generally, I do like to kind of open up a piano patch and just sort of sketch ideas. And sometimes talking about being all consuming, um, that can be I'll be driving. There's a joke. There's a sketch group called The Whitest Kids You Know. I don't know if you're familiar with that group.
No.
And they have a John Williams sketch that is hilarious, and it's also just it really does feel um it feels like what I'm doing. So the whole bit is that they're like, how does John Williams, you know, come up with themes? And and he decides his in the sketch, his wife says that she can outcompose John Williams, and so they said they're going to have a contest to see who writes the best theme. And their son Sherwin Williams is going to decide who who has the best theme. And so it goes through this whole day of John Williams driving around to the drive-through, and he's just singing to himself. Like it just he's just singing the whole time. And then the wife is just doing nothing. She's just doing her normal day. But it sort of feels like that in the sense that like I'll be doing stuff and I'm just like constantly thinking about this problem. It's like a puzzle, right? Like you're thinking to yourself, okay, how does this work? And then if the idea strikes you, if the melody strikes you, I'll open up voice memos and sing it into my phone, And I even have some videos of like, I have a YouTube channel and I actually have an example of like, here is literally me singing into my phone, this theme. And then here's the theme in the final version.
Oh,
right?
That's awesome.
So I'll do that. And then from there, unfortunately, with a lot of these projects, you don't have a ton of time, you got to get rolling. You can be writing on multiple projects. You're writing 2 to 4 minutes of music in a day. So a lot of times, like once you kind of have the themes, you just got to get moving.
Sure.
So once I kind of have themes and then I know where we're going, I'll sometimes do a sketch in orchestra, like in samples, and then I'll send it to the director or the producer, whoever is the creative, and get some feedback just so we know we're in the right ballpark. Before I get too deep into writing, and then it just feels like there's point of no return once you get past, oh, well, I've written 6 minutes of music and this is due in 3 weeks. But that's sort of my process. Obviously, it varies on project to project. If it's going to be recorded, I oftentimes you got to be a little more judicious in how you write, if that makes sense, right? Like a lot of times, because the turnarounds are so fast, I'll know, okay, this is what I'm recording. So I need to be aware of that before I start sketching the actual orchestral ideas. And can we achieve this sound with whatever ensemble we're using,
Yeah. Cool. Well, that was very fascinating. I appreciate the answer. So before we take a quick break, I'm going to ask you, Andrew, to play a quick game that this week we're calling Schumann or not Schumann. That is the question. So I'm going to ask you a series of 5 true or false statements about Robert and Clara Schumann. You're a winner just for playing the game, so just do your best.
My piano teacher may get very upset, All
right, number 1. True or false? Robert Schumann ran away from law school to become a concert pianist.
I'm going to say false.
It is true, although a later hand injury changed him from pianist to composer.
Okay, I knew he was a pianist. I just didn't know. I thought you were trying to trick me, All
right, number 2. True or false? Clara Schumann started writing her piano concerto when she was 13, and Robert conducted the premiere performance.
True.
Close. She did start writing at 13, but Felix Mendelssohn actually conducted the premiere with Clara as soloist.
Yep. Yep. See, this is what I knew. You were gonna be like half correct.
Number 3, Clara's greatest compositions came later in her life. True or false?
I mean, I feel like it's pretty subjective, right? I mean, I'm gonna say false.
That is false. She didn't
Yeah.
compose anything after the age of 36.
Yeah.
Number 4, true or false? Robert Schumann was the first composer to write for piano quintet.
False.
It is true. The earliest piece for piano and string quartet is 1842, titled Piano Quintet.
Yeah. Okay.
Don't worry, I didn't know half of this before I looked it up either, so don't worry about it.
Good.
And number 5, true or false? Robert suffered from mental illness, most likely diagnosed today as bipolar or schizophrenic. So, true or false? Psychiatrists of the day used his music as a means of psychiatric diagnosis and studying his bipolar moods. Go with your gut.
Yeah, I'm gonna say true.
That is true.
Yeah.
So their studying of his music caused other musicians to further study his music as well. So pretty interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it's a little more obscure than my basic piano teacher knowledge that I think I would have gotten, you know.
Well, that's great. I hope everybody learned something today. And like I said, you're already a winner just for playing the game. All right, we're going to take
one, Steve.
We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to listen to some of Andrew's compositions. Welcome back. This is Steve Danielson. I'm talking today with Andrew Morgan Smith. So we're going to talk first today about your work on the film Bunker. I don't often get to talk with composers about movies that are currently in theaters, but as of this recording, the movie came out 4 days ago. This is a mystery/horror movie set in the era of World War I, and I understand the director had some unusual request for this film, an overture. Not every modern movie has an overture, so why this time?
So Bunker was an interesting phone call, the initial phone call with the director. Basically, he called me up and said, "Hey, I have this like crazy idea that I really want, and I'm told you're the guy to call for this." And I thought, oh, great. What is this going to be? And he said, I want like we're making a neoclassical movie. We're making not a neoclassical movie. We're making a throwback movie. So we're making the premise is what if like a 1920s, 1930s, 1940s production company made a horror movie, right? So, and they tried, they shot it on sets, right? They did everything like you would have done in like a 1930s, 1940s movie, right? Like throwing back to like these Universal monster movies.
Sure.
It's in a bunker, but it's in a set, right? And or like when they're crawling through no man's land on the battlefield, that's all a set. So it has this very specific look, almost like if you're familiar with the Universal monster movies, like the werewolf,
right.
Like these like fog sets where like you get past like 30 feet and there's just fog, right? You don't see the wall. So like he said, I'm making this movie and I want the score, and even down to like it's not even shot in the same aspect ratio as modern movies, right? It's shot in the more medium, like everything's medium formatted. They did slower takes, they did slower things. The actors are even acting more in this older style. And what he said was, what we really need, we need music that says, what if a 1940s composer scored a horror movie, like a modern horror movie? And to get us out of the gate in the right way, we need to do an overture. And so that was the initial sell, was like, we need an overture because people need to know when we start, this is what you're doing. And which is a bit, I mean, yeah, and it's not some huge overture, right? Like you watch Ben-Hur and the overture is probably 7 minutes long.
Right.
This is like a 2-minute overture that kind of goes through all the different themes in the movie. It goes through like the main monster theme. It goes through all these different ideas. It goes through and so it only lasts about about like 2 minutes, but it was so crucial to get the right tone as we started. And I think we succeeded in the sense that when you read reviews of it, people specifically point out like the music when we start the movie tells you what this movie's going to be, right? And you can tell the people who don't get it just because they hear it as like a throwback. They'll even say, "Oh, it feel like this whole movie feels dated." It's like, well, yeah, that's what we're doing.
The point.
That's the feature, not the bug.
That's awesome. So sticking with Bunker, I want to also turn to the swashbuckling cue.
Yes.
So you said in your email to me that this particular piece is a great representation of what you were going for in the score.
Yeah.
Sort of the throwback feel. You put a quote on the YouTube description. So experience the eerie oscillation between modern horror and classic emotive neoclassical vibes.
Yeah.
So tell us more about the swashbuckling adventure cue that you've got there.
Yeah. So the whole, once again, going back to this like old meets new experience, right? And what Adrian, the director, specifically had talked about was what happens if these older composers had scored these movies, right? Now, whenever you look at, Korngold scoring these pirate fights, right? The pirate ship fights, it's like each hit has its little moment, right? It's almost animated in a way. It's like the same style that we do now for animation. And that's what he wanted. He was like, so swashbuckling is the title of it is only because that's literally how we referred to this style of music during this fight scene. So it's a fight scene between the protagonist and the antagonist, and each like hit is an actual punch or kick or whatever. And that's
Gotcha.
like the whole bit is like
watching an old Robin Hood film or something.
Exactly. So part of the whole sequence was it had to be like, oh, he sees the knife, this changes. He sees this thing, it changes. He gets hit. We have to have hits here, right? And so that's what that refers to, right? But it's scored like the sonically, it doesn't sound like it's recorded in the 1930s, right? But it's performed and trying to get that style. What if these composers had access to all the things we have now?
Yeah.
That was the move for it.
Awesome. Well, we are going to listen now to the overture and swashbuckling from Bunker, performed here by the Budapest Symphony Orchestra with Francois Rousselot conducting, and Andrew is on the piano guts /prepared piano. Do you want to say anything about that before we listen?
Sure. So someone gifted me, because they were moving, the inside of an upright piano, like nothing else but the strings and the soundboard. And I thought, this is cool. I have no idea when I'm going to use this, but I should get it. So I drove and I picked it up and I loaded it into my storage unit. And, I was like, okay, at some point this will come in handy. Well, they called me up for this movie and I thought, this may be the time. So I unloaded this monstrosity out of storage, this however many pound, probably 200-pound soundboard. And I set it up in my office and I just beat it. I bowed it. I plucked it. I did all this stuff to it. I even did all the almost whale sounding noises are all that. It's all the piano. That's
awesome.
But it's with like super balls, and I took like violin bows and I just like, and I took the hair off of it and I did, kind of rubbed it and all this kind of stuff. So all the effects and even down to the hits, like I even doubled hits on it.
Uh-huh.
And it all came out great. So that's what, and I affectionately called it the piano guts, Well,
that's awesome. All right, we're going to listen here to the overture and swashbuckling. All right, next let's turn to another film project, the Nicolas Cage film The Old Way, also just released in 2023. So you were asked to write music for an Old West gunslinging action film. So what sort of elements are you adding into your score to make sure it has the flavor of the Old West?
Well, it's kind of an interesting one quick thing. It says we only have 9 minutes left. Do you want to back out and get back in before we
Uh,
start this?
we'll if we get close, we can do
Okay,
that. Go ahead
sorry. I
and
just
yeah,
wanted to
go
ask
ahead with
that.
your description. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So, in the old way, when it first came to me, they were much more interested in kind of a guitar-based, more modern score.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and obviously, like, this is a Nicolas Cage movie, and it was hard for me to pass up the opportunity because he kind of plays against type, right? We have Nicolas Cage is usually over the top. And I mean, he's great, but he's usually kind of over the top, and in this movie, he is not at all.
Uh-huh.
Um, he's very stoic. So what we were finding was between the contrast of him playing this very stoic character and also just this visual. I mean, it was shot in Montana, so it's this visually very expansive film. The guitar stuff just felt too intimate. Like it didn't feel cinematic at all. The movie also isn't like some gritty Western. It's not that. So the movie itself is kind of a throwback to what we're calling a classic studio Western. So like a John Wayne movie, right? Like it's a little more in that world than like Bone Tomahawk or something, you know?
Uh-huh.
And so what we were kind of realizing was once again, just like in Bunker, we need to clue the audience into what we're doing. Like we can't do something that is just kind of run of the mill. And frankly, like every Western, Westerns have been scored in basically every genre. I've heard it in, guitars. I've heard it in, I mean, everything, percussion and ensemble, you know? So what they came to me and asked was, hey, we want to do this like a classic studio Western. That's what we want. And what does that mean? So after kind of thinking a lot on it, I listened to a lot of different scores. I kind of came to this idea eventually of it's shot in Montana. What if we did like Rocky Mountain folk music added into this like classic Western kind of Copeland-esque style, right? And that was what the push into this style was. And I did things to update it because we want it to be a modern studio Western. We don't want it to be we still wanted like a modern sound, an interesting sound. So there's like delays and reverbs and all these interesting stuff on the fiddle and banjo and guitars, but still have that classic sensibility to the score.
All right, so the first piece we're going to listen to is called Ambush. So I haven't seen the film yet. Is when this music is being used, is it the protagonist being ambushed, or is he the one doing the ambushing? And do you think that would have changed how you scored it?
Yeah, so actually the ambush doesn't take place with the protagonist at all. It's
Okay.
The gang that is being chased by the protagonist ambushes basically some federal marshals, the federal marshal party.
Gotcha.
And if it had been the protagonist, yeah, it would have been different, right? They don't really at least in this situation, we don't get at the end of the cue, you kind of hear this hard out, this kind of push out, and that's when actually the marshal kind of turns to fight back, and then we cut back to our protagonist because they're hearing the gunshots across the canyon or whatever. So actually most of this cue is on the antagonist side, right? As in they're the one pushing everything forward. The marshals, the ones who got ambushed, they're trying to take cover. They're trying to, you'll hear at one point someone, tries to run for another spot and get shot. You'll even hear that moment, this build in this sequence. So, it would obviously be different. Hopefully the protagonist would have fought back quicker, I guess. But that's kind of what's happening in it is the marshal gets ambushed. They're trying to take stock of the situation. They're trying to take cover. They're trying to fight back. And finally, when they turn to fight back, that's when we cut away from this cue.
Gotcha. So the second piece we're going to listen to from the Old Way, Colton Opens Up. You said this was one of the more popular tracks from the score. So in your opinion, what do you think it is that people like about this track?
Well, I mean, actually, I'm kind of surprised it is. Not that I don't like the cue. Not that I don't like the cue. I'm actually surprised because it is this really interestingly reserved cue.
Mm-hmm.
And so the movie, the whole story is based around this father-daughter relationship. And this is one of those things that did work really well with the guitar-based temp music they had originally, was the guitar stuff felt very intimate, right? So that was something they wanted to preserve. They thought, okay, well, this sounds really intimate. We like how the back and forth that the guitar stuff kind of had. So they wanted to preserve that, which I was all for because I like the change in pace, you know?
Sure.
And so in this cue, we get a lot of these guitar, we get a lot of banjo, we get a lot of fiddle. And the lead character and the daughter are it's heavily implied they're on the spectrum, right?
Uh-huh.
And what would that have been like back, because the movie takes place at the turn of the into the 20th century, like takes place early 1900s, late 1800s, that kind of time period. And so what would that have been like, right? If you were on the spectrum at that time period, like how do you get by? What happens, right? And so in this cue, in this it's a fireside chat between the dad and the daughter. He kind of opens up to her because he's now realized that she's like him. She doesn't experience things and doesn't show things the same way as other people do. So it's not that he doesn't have emotions, you know, it's not that he doesn't have emotions. He just doesn't express them the same way that someone else might.
Right.
So he talks about how he has kind of dealt with that through his life, and why he became this mercenary, and then how he met her mother, and that changed some things for him. So you can kind of hear her theme play through, which was played on the fiddle, and you hear so like the rising theme in there is her theme, and then the daughter's theme is usually played on the banjo. So like you're hearing some of her stuff, you're hearing some of his stuff, and yeah, I mean I'm overjoyed that people are that into it. You know?
Awesome. Well, we're now going to listen to Ambush and Colton Opens Up from The Old Way, performed again here by the Budapest Symphony Orchestra. So, Andrew, what are you working on now that you can tell us about?
Well, obviously, I'm really excited that Bunker just came out. That's been kind of this, both Bunker and The Old Way were these kind of labors of love um, projects. In fact, some people had reached out to me and asked about the score specifically for Bunker. So I actually ended up, you can download both PDFs of the full recorded score for Bunker as well as The Old Way on my website.
Wow.
So that was kind of a thought. I mean, there's just not enough. I think there's not enough study material out there anyway to be able to listen, one to one. It's hard to find. So I thought that might be a good idea. In fact, even right before we got on this podcast, I was searching for some Miklos Rosa scores to study. But so that's exciting. I have the Owl House is I think the finale airs in April. Don't quote me on that because they haven't announced any dates specifically.
Well, that'll be right around the time that this episode airs.
Okay,
so
well,
at
some point. So sometime in April, I think, is whenever this should be coming out. And I have the same director. I'm working with the same director who did Bunker on another horror movie called Raghorn, which is wrapping up. I should be finishing it this week, actually. And I have another kind of actually it's a Louisiana-based kind of thriller mystery movie talking about folk justice and all this kind of stuff. I'm not sure when that's coming out yet either because I'm still working on it, but those are kind of the big things going on at the moment that I'm excited about,
Awesome. So if my listeners do want to learn more about you, you mentioned your website. Can you plug your website, social media? Where can we find you?
Yeah, you can find me at andrewmorgansmith.com. That's my website. And from there, you can pull most other stuff, but I also have a YouTube channel, which is, I think it's Andrew Morgan Smith Music is my YouTube. And you'll be able to find most of my other socials on there on my professional website. Or if you want to find me on Spotify, Apple Music, all that stuff, it's just Andrew Morgan Smith. And try to release as much as I can,
Awesome. Well, hey, listeners out there, make sure that you have taken time to hit that subscribe button on your preferred podcast platform. Get the next episode delivered right to your door in a secure envelope, ready for your enjoyment, or at least delivered directly to your phone. Subscribe now while you're thinking about it, and you won't regret it. Well, Andrew, today has been a lot of fun. I've really appreciated getting to know you and your music. Thank you for joining me today on Moveable Dough.
Thank you for having me, man. I'm honored.
My guest today was composer Andrew Morgan Smith. If you have a recommendation for a future guest or an idea for the show, please email me at movabledough@gmail.com. This is Steve Danielson. Keep the music moving.